The numbers of people who have come to hear Mr. Dunbar speak, the Los Angeles Assembly decided to hold 2 shifts. In other words, we have asked Mr. Dunbar, and he's graciously consented, to speak twice this evening because of the numbers of people who are coming. We did not have the time or the opportunity to get another location and then to tell all your communities about it. And so we wanted to be fair to everybody, give everyone a chance to see him, maybe ask a few questions. He will speak approximately, well, his total time per meeting will be about 1 hour.
And to the cause of God, Mr. William Sears, talking about Los Angeles.
In parts of the world than any other community in the United States, and has had a wonderful record of success. And also because it's called Los Angeles, Los Angeles, right? Means the angels. And in the Baha'i world faith, Abdul-Baha says the sincere believers are the angels. So I assume you're all working on that. 3rd goal of the 5-year plan. And also all over the world it's called LA. And those are the initials of local assembly, so you can see that what a responsibility that you have. And one of the states of the 3 really chosen, you know, New York, Illinois, California, Washington, D.C. for entry by troops. Largest municipal community in the United States. I think if the success is going to come in California, and it will come, that you are going to be the heart and the spearhead of it all. It's only to be expected that you would be, because of the great numbers and the great enthusiasm. So I hope you'll remember that as the goals come. Also, I just wanted to say farewell to you. I'll be leaving in about 10 days to go back to Canada, but I hope to come back again. I understand we may have to have 2 meetings tonight. Isn't that marvelous? That's the way I told you once before. Remember, it was going to get like that this room would be altogether too small, and that the Pauley Pavilion wouldn't hold us in the very near future. We'll have to have 2 meetings, and you know where they'll be, the 2, one in the afternoon and one at night in the Coliseum. And it won't be too long because that'll be too small. The onrushing hoofbeats of Baha'u'llah's battalions can be heard everywhere. And I'm sure that ours are going to be amongst them. Now, the reason that I really came besides all of that, because you are so wonderful and it's always a great joy to be with you, is to have a chance to be in the presence of a member of the International Teaching Center and to share with you something of the significance, very briefly, of that great institution. We hear the name Baha'i International Teaching Center. It sounds, you know, like it may be something just purely administrative about teaching. But it has its roots, really, in the words of Baha'u'llah, as the Universal House of Justice shared with us all of the background of the International Teaching Center when it was established. And the beloved Master spoke about it. And the beloved Guardian wrote to Persia, beautiful letter about the International Teaching Center by name, and that it would have its seat in the site of Mount Carmel. And he called it one of those world-shaping institutions. And that's what it is, and that's who we're going to hear from tonight, someone who is a part of one of those institutions. And I just didn't want to miss the opportunity to come and share with you some of the wonderful things I've heard about this great institution and what it means. And I shared with you, some of you, where you'll remember at Long Beach, their letter that they wrote September 12th, calling for intensified individual teaching. And I said at the time, and I hope you'll remember, what a wonderful thing that letter was and that call. That the International Teaching Center always encourages the counselors and their board members. But that's the first time in history, the very first time in the history of the faith, that this institution on the site of Mount Carmel has called upon all of the counselors and all of their board members all over the world and all of their assistants to arise and inspire all of us to intensified individual teaching. That's unique, something unprecedented. Faith is moving on so rapidly, all of these things are happening. Sometimes we forget how wonderful we are and who we are. I wanted to read just one short paragraph. I think I have one short paragraph. Yes, I do. And that will tell you about this wonderful institution. from the beloved guardian about the Universal House of Justice and what they would give to us in the future. When the Universal House of Justice shall have stepped forth from the realm of hope into that of visible fulfillment, and its fame be established in every corner and clime of the world, then that august body, solidly grounded and founded on the firm and unshakable foundations of the entire Baha'i community of East and West, and the recipient of the bounties of God and his divine inspiration, will proceed to devise and carry out important undertakings, worldwide activities, and the establishment of glorious institutions. And by this means, the renown of the cause of God will illumine the whole earth. Carry out important undertakings. We're already embarked on the second of those, the 9-year plan and now the 5-year plan. They would establish glorious institutions, the first of which was the Continental Board of Counselors, the second of which was the International Teaching Center. And our honored guest tonight is a member of both. And I know he feels like I do, that whenever he's introduced any place in the world, he'd rather have whoever speaks about him say that he was a pioneer, as he was, of course, to Latin America, as was his dear wife. I haven't seen Sutherland yet, but I'm expecting a hug and a kiss a little later on. Allahu Akbar. Beloved guardian said pioneering was the single most important service any Baha'i could render in any plan. And so we have with us one of the heroes of God. And it is a joy, believe me, from the bottom of my heart, when I think of the site of the mountain of God. I can see where they're excavating the land for the house of justice, the seat of the house of justice, where the law of God will go down from Mount Zion. And I can see over on the other side where they have the building that is planned for the study of the text. Then next to it again, the seat of the International Teaching Center on that great arc in a harmonizing style of architecture. And when I think of that and I can hear the words of the beloved guardian talking about the future, I can only say to you what an honor it is, what a joy, and how my heart throbs with happiness and delight to be in the same city and in the same room with a member of the International Teaching Center, Mr. Hooper Dunbar.
Mr. Sears has been too modest himself, I think, tonight to let you know and repeat what the House of Justice has said, that all of the hands of the cause of God are the members of the International Teaching Center. So it is also my honor to be in the presence of one of the members of that institution here tonight. The membership of the International Teaching Center consists of the 16 hands of the cause of God, and initially of 3 counselor members, which brings the total membership to 19. There is a nucleus of the International Teaching Center which functions in the Holy Land, which has 7 members, 4 hands of the cause and the 3 counselor members. And the 4 hands of the cause are the hands of the cause residing in the Holy Land, with whom I'm sure you are all familiar. Amatul Bahar Ruhia Khanum, Mr. Furatan, hand of the cause Mr. Furatan, hand of the cause Mr. Faizi, and hand of the cause Paul Heaney. And then the other 2 counselor members, Mrs. Florence Mayberry, who I think you've all seen not too long ago here, and also Mr. Aziz Yazdi, who I believe was also here. They spoke to me about their visits with the Friends in Los Angeles, and they all join me in giving you loving greetings on behalf of the World Center. Apart from that and above that, I would like to convey to you the greetings of the members of the Universal House of Justice, God's House of Justice. They are constantly encouraging the friends everywhere to direct their attention to this present worldwide enterprise, the 5-year plan. I think that it might be good to tell you from the beginning that we're really on a family visit this time, and that the remarks that I make here tonight are not an official message from the International Teaching Center, but they are my observations, my own comments about the way I view what's going on at the World Center, what's going on in the Baha'i world, and that therefore really I'm responsible for what I say and not the Teaching Center. That will enable me to be more candid, I think. What I'd like to start off with this evening to talk about a little is something that I think that is of vital importance to all of us, and that is revising and always updating our understanding of what the administrative order of this great faith consists of. You know that the beloved guardian, when he took over the direction of the faith after the passing of the master, after Abdu'l-Baha ascended to the Abha kingdom and left his young grandson to guide the destinies of this cause for 36 years, he set about establishing instruments in this world in the form of local spiritual assemblies and national spiritual assemblies, the outlines of which had been set forth and indicated in the teachings of Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha, forging these instruments through which the spirit of the cause could operate. And he said that these were the body, and that the divine plan of Abdu'l-Baha was the spirit that must animate that body, like the soul of the Baha'i community. And it's in carrying out this mandate of Abdu'l-Baha in the tablets of the divine plan, through this administrative order, that we have met with all this marvelous success that's accumulated decade past decade during the Guardian's life, and now into the era of the Universal House of Justice. But in building these local and national communities up, the Guardian held in abeyance launching the divine plan in an organized, systematic manner for 17 years. And it wasn't until, 30 years after the inception of the formative age of the faith in 1951 that he began to take the first steps in the development of the international institutions of the faith. He developed local institutions, national institutions, and then he turned his great God-guided vision to the development of the international institutions of the faith and the implications of the Master's will and testament in their initial stage. Now, sometimes we read about the administrative order, we study about the administrative order in the early letters of the Guardian, and up to God Passes By, and we form a vision of the administrative order which consists of local spiritual assemblies, national spiritual assemblies, and the Universal House of Justice. It doesn't often occur to us, I think, when we remember that vision, maybe from recent study, maybe because of not having really contemplated on all the implications of the messages of the Guardian during the World Crusade, when he named the early contingents of the Hands of the Cause of God and said that this glorious institution, this indispensable and vital institution, would develop by stages into its God-given functions of protection and propagation of the faith. We sometimes lose the connecting links to see the connection between these two aspects of our cause. And the House of Justice now, in the Constitution, which they have given to the Baha'i world, this most great law, the Constitution of the Universal House of Justice, which will affect the destinies of men on this planet from now until the coming of the next manifestation of God, they define for us what the administrative order consists of. I'd like to read this to refresh our memories and then talk a little bit about one aspect of it. The administrative order consists, on the one hand, of a series of elected councils, universal, secondary, and local, in which are vested legislative, executive, and judicial powers over the Baha'i community. And on the other, of eminent and devoted believers appointed for the specific purposes of protecting and propagating the faith of Baha'u'llah under the guidance of the head of that faith. This administrative order is the nucleus and pattern of the world order adumbrated by Baha'u'llah. In the course of its divinely propelled organic growth, its institutions will expand, putting forth auxiliary branches and developing subordinate agencies, multiplying their activities and diversifying their functions in consonance with the principles and purposes revealed by Baha'u'llah for the progress of the human race. So these two aspects of the administrative order, the elected councils on one hand and these appointed individuals on the other, these form the whole of the administrative order. And if we refer to just one side without the other, we are giving an incomplete and distorted picture of what the administrative order of Baha'u'llah is and of what its future pattern for the world order of Baha'u'llah is going to be, because that's what the present nucleus is. So I think that perhaps these thoughts are more in my mind serving at the World Center and serving on the International Teaching Center, and realizing how the very exciting aspect of the development of the administrative order is taking place in the present day development of the other arm of the administrative order. The head of the faith, after the passing of the guardian, is of course the Universal House of Justice, and all institutions and all activities of the cause come under its supreme guidance. On one hand, one arm of the institutions consists of the National Assemblies and the local spiritual assemblies, and on this other hand, the International Teaching Center, which is really the crowning development in the development and unfoldment of the institution of the hands of the cause of God, which was alluded to by Baha'u'llah, really established, ordained by Baha'u'llah in his days, elaborated by the Master in his will and testament. And the boards of counselors around the world, now 13 continental boards of counselors, and the auxiliary board members, and finally, in this period, since the little competition.
Todo, my son.
I told you it was a family visit, didn't I? And now, in this time, since the establishment of the Universal House of Justice, this development of a new auxiliary branch or a subordinate agency, the decision of the Universal House of Justice to provide for the counselors to authorize their auxiliary board members to appoint assistants around the world, to assist them in their tasks, to aid them in the fulfillment of their function. And it is now this arm which at the moment is experiencing the pressures of historical circumstances, as the Guardian used to say. You know that all of the guidance that comes to the cause, that came to the cause through the Guardian, that comes to the cause through the Universal House of Justice, can't in any way be conceived by the believers as a pushiness from the institution. Because these divinely guided bodies are in touch with the reality of the circumstances in the world. They monitor them and they communicate them to us. What is that level of responsibility that is commensurate with being a Baha'i at this moment in our lifetime? How marvelous that someone interprets that for us so that we know what we have to aim for, what we have to do. And so it's the pressure of historical circumstances. It's the acceleration of the breakdown of the old world order, the deterioration of the whole society that's around us, the tremendous increase in the rate of the growth of materialism, the forces of irreligion which are active all over the face of the planet, and that are letting loose these energies of the baser nature of man and leading to such destruction. All of this throws into greater historical perspective the role that the Baha'is must play in getting the message and remedy of Baha'u'llah out to the peoples. Because still we are far from proclaiming the cause so that people know what it is and what it's for. And that's our part. As much as we've done, humanity really has not responded in the proportion that would be expected for Baha'u'llah's messenger, for Baha'u'llah's message. And naturally, this is the reason that the conditions of the world are breaking down so. But in the midst of the growing darkness, our role increases. And we must be beacon lights of guidance. Guiding, as the Guardian said in one of his letters to one of the pioneers, guiding the teeming millions of mankind to the refuge of the cause. Now, with the function of propagation and of protection of the cause, protection also of the spiritual health of the Baha'i communities, clearly resting mutually on the elected councils and also on these appointed bodies, on these appointed individuals, we can see how they have to call to our attention all the time what the needs of the hour are. We can see why this 5-year plan really has to become identical with our pulse, so that everything that happens in it will affect us. And just like we know when we are becoming weak, we have to take some sort of food or some sort of vitamins to lift us up and make us active again. Or if we're becoming fatigued or spiritually fatigued, we're going to take up the prayer book because we realize our own state. So we have to watch the state of the Baha'i community. Abdu'l-Baha in his Will and Testament, he gives us all the goal of protecting the faith and of teaching the cause. And that means protecting our own spiritual state, preserving our own spiritual health, making sure that we are an animated, healthy, positive part of our community, so that this reality of Baha'i community life can come into being. Now you know that these characteristics of Baha'i community life that the House of Justice mentions in the message that launches the 5-year plan is really the heart of winning the first 2 objectives that they talk about: preserving the victories already won in the past plans, and also the vast expansion which is expected in this plan to come about through the preservation of the victories and through these characteristics of Baha'i community life. Essential to that is the theme that I think all the Baha'i teachers are talking about all of the time, which is love and unity. But we need to realize that the unity of the Baha'i faith, the unity which must be expressed in the Baha'i community, in our community life, is not a decision to put up with each other, mutually tolerate each other in the Baha'i community and try to be nice to everybody else and live with them in a spirit of kindness and loving kindness. But it's really the reflection of the unity and oneness of God streaming into the hearts of each believer, causing them to reflect and shine with this light of the spiritual world. And then our witnessing those lights in each other and being enamored of each other because of them, and causing thereby the increase of the love of God in our own hearts. Abdu'l-Baha says, when the mirrors filled with this light face each other, it will be light upon light. It causes this tremendous excitement. This is this unity and love which has to appear in the Baha'i community. It's that light, as Abdu'l-Baha says, with which the sun shines, that doesn't look upon what it's shining. It shines on high and low alike, on rich and poor, on the fertile and on the arid parts of the world without discrimination. And this is the light of the Baha'i love that must be established in each of our hearts and bring into being this characteristic Baha'i community life. And when that happens, you know the result. Because wherever it happens, you see a tremendous attraction of non-Baha'is to the Baha'i community to find out what it is and to become a part of it. And if our teaching work is not going ahead, and if we're not having new believers, then the secret is this question of love and unity among the believers. And that's the decision, and that's the really the decisive point that the assembly has to center on with the friends. How can we lift everybody spiritually and create this spirit so that it will be reflected in our teaching meetings and in our actions on an individual basis with everybody we meet? We should be more a member of the Baha'i community, of that spiritual body of the Baha'i community, than even a member of our own family. The unity of the family is essential, but it's not a goal of the 5-year plan. Now, as this spirit comes into being, it will hold the new Baha'is in our communities. You know that the House of Justice has talked about the aim and purpose of teaching in the message which they sent to the Baha'i world on May 25th. And you can be sure that the House of Justice worked long hours on that message, organizing it and preparing it to send to the Baha'i world. And they long to see the reaction in the Baha'i world to that message and what it calls for. It really deals with all those aspects of the 5-year plan that need immediate attention. And they say that the purpose of teaching is not just to attract souls to the point where they embrace the cause and accept the cause. But the purpose of teaching goes on beyond that, though that's an important milestone in a process, to the point where those souls dedicate themselves and consecrate themselves to the service of the cause by their own energies and through the confirmations that come to them from God because of the efforts that they make in the service of the faith. So what does that say to us when we're teaching? It says to us that when a person becomes a Baha'i, our work isn't finished. Our work teaching and sharing the faith and sharing the spirit of the cause with new believers, or with those that we attract to the cause, is not complete until they arise in their turn to serve the interests of the cause and to take an active part in the administrative order. Now, that's been in our teachings a long time, but here's a very clearly stated definition of it from the House of Justice. I remember in the old days when I was here in the Los Angeles community, the new Baha'is, we used to talk to each other and we'd say, it was really great until we became Baha'is. I mean, they were taking care of us and everybody'd bring you coffee and they were right with you at every moment in the firesides and everything. I said, since I became a Baha'i, nobody even looks at me anymore, It's like a new child that's born and he's excited to be alive, but nobody feeds him. So this is something that we have to take into consideration in all of our plans. And this is one of the reasons that the goal of preserving the victories is right up in the forefront of the objectives of the 5-year plan. Because so many people came in the rush, in the growth of the cause at the end of the 9-year plan, that weren't being fed. That a system had to be created whereby they could be fed and could be sustained and could be held in the cause. And it became clear and evident in the consultations held in the Holy Land that the time had come when we could no longer depend principally on nationally directed teaching projects for the development and expansion of the cause of God. But this must now be balanced by locally sponsored teaching activities throughout the whole Baha'i world. The Baha'i world needed to be carpeted with a vast covering of active local spiritual assemblies, so close to each other that they could mutually charge nearby areas and create new groups and new assemblies and open new isolated centers. And they in turn could sustain them. So many victories of the 9-year plan were won by small teams that went out into areas where no Baha'is existed and brought in thousands, tens of thousands, literally, of new believers. And they found themselves in that perplexing position whereby they couldn't carry out what the House of Justice had said, that they should not leave the new believers to their own devices. There were too few of them, there were too many communities all at once to really do the job properly. And this has created a crisis in the statistics of the faith, which has meant that holding the level of spiritual assemblies in the Baha'i world has been very difficult, and we've suffered losses during this first period of the 5-year plan in relation to what we had at the end of the 9-year plan even. You know, our other plans were long, 10-year plan, a 9-year plan. We got into a crisis in the last 3 years and everybody got moving. Well, we're in that crisis now in the 5-year plan because there's only 3 years left. Now is the time that all the Baha'is really have to pour their energy. I remember Mr. Sears stressing, you know, if we did what we were going to do or what we usually do in the last year, in the first year of the plan, then we wouldn't have this. But we still didn't do it in the first year of this plan either. To this vision of possibilities which the House of Justice has extended before us in making this plan. Now we find that our expansion has to be very solidly based when it's a community organized activity. Of course, Baha'is, wherever they go, should be teaching and spreading the cause of God. There's no limitation to that in any way. But when we have organized activities, we should plan the consolidation part of the activity together when we plan the expansion part of the activity. So we're sure that they will go hand in hand. And we're sure we can hold together the victories that we achieve. In other words, expansion should proceed at a pace which will allow consolidation to be effective. In India, Dr. Mohajir was talking about when you go to a village and open a village, you should plan on continuing activities there for 15 years. That's about how long it takes to get a community really functioning and standing on its own feet. Now, it's not always that way in all the countries, in all the areas of the world, but it's not a bad average. How old is the Los Angeles Spiritual Assembly, and how far has it come in all the years that it's been functioning? You see, it's a process that's gradual as you develop this community life and the possibilities of the assemblies. But also, we're in a time of greater receptivity to the cause. So the possibilities of teaching are very great. And part of this vast expansion, it's obvious if we're going to follow this outlined form of expansion and consolidation that the House of Justice has given to us, a lot of the expansion is going to have to take place in communities where assemblies already exist. Now you're waiting for entry by troops in California. Here's your community, maybe 800 believers here in Los Angeles, in a city of 8 million, is it now? I don't know. It's grown so much since I was here the last time. 8 million people. What a tremendous challenge. I think your challenge is greater than the Baha'i communities in some of the other countries, where the proportion of believers is larger than what you are to what the possibilities are in your city. It's very, very good. And everywhere the Baha'i communities have this challenge to face. Now, another thing that helps us to understand the messages of the House of Justice is a definition that they gave recently when they said that teaching is an activity which has various aspects. And those aspects are expansion, consolidation, and proclamation. Teaching is an activity which has various aspects, of which expansion, consolidation, and proclamation are parts. This is good for us to think that consolidation is also teaching. We shouldn't think that when we are teaching and deepening new believers and the Baha'is that we're not teaching. This is also teaching, and it draws to us the confirmations of God. When we're proclaiming the cause, this is also teaching. All of these are teaching functions. They should be thought of as teaching. You know, in Tehran, when the work was very difficult, in the early days of the faith, the Master sent a tablet to the believers in Tehran, and he told them that teaching the cause of God must be the center of everyone's thoughts. All thoughts must be centered on teaching, because that is what attracts the bounties of God. If we don't teach, and if we don't think about teaching, at least that's what he told them, was thinking about teaching. He said, even if the results don't come, keep concentrating on thinking about teaching. And even if you have to use wisdom and be very cautious, you know, you can't, because in those days you couldn't speak too openly. Maybe it would take a long time to bring a person to the point where you could tell them that what the source of the inspiration that you were giving to them, that you were teaching them. But he said, keep your thoughts centered on teaching. That attracts the bounties of God. Now, if we think that we're fulfilling our Baha'i part by serving the administration or giving to the fund, but we're not teaching, we make this mistake of not attracting to ourselves these divine bounties that only come through thinking and carrying out teaching. Of course, when you think about teaching, you'll teach too. Because when you're thinking about teaching, you'll pray to teach in the morning, and then by the time you get through the day, you will have met one of those souls you were begging Baha'u'llah to let cross your path so that you could share the teachings with you. You'll think of somebody in your daily life that you never thought of for telling about the message. The International Teaching Center is thinking about these things all the time. The nucleus in the Holy Land is thinking about them. And we have the bounty of hearing from the pilgrims how the actual grassroots working of the cause is going on around the world when they come flowing like lifeblood into the Holy Land to imbibe, as the Guardian said, and then carry out the Spirit and impart it to the friends again. And I'm sure many of you have been in touch with pilgrims to the Holy Land because there's such a great flow of them these days. And there we share also with them these ideas, and we talk to them about what's going on at the local spiritual assembly level. And we talk about this great emphasis in this plan to build up the local spiritual assemblies. Recently, I had the bounty of going to India and visiting the Baha'i community throughout that vast country. India is faced with a unique challenge in this 5-year plan. You know, your national community has, 900 and so many local spiritual assemblies, and has to raise the number to how many? Somebody tell me from here. 1,500 in this plan. India has the goal of 7,000 local spiritual assemblies, and at present they have 3,500. Your national community has the greatest percentage of active local spiritual assemblies, functioning local spiritual assemblies of any Baha'i community that I know of in the whole Baha'i world. But in India, there's a very small percentage of those present 3,000 assemblies that are functioning. And it's in that country that I think we've discovered one of the great purposes and wisdoms in the Universal House of Justice, allowing for the appointment of assistants by auxiliary board members. We found one area where one auxiliary board member, actually in the zone assigned to him for regular and systematic visits, a man with a full-time job and living in another place, 2,000 local spiritual assemblies in one place. Now, obviously, that had happened. You know, wasn't set up that way. That's something that happened because of the growth and development of the cause. But it gives you an idea of the challenge. How does this man sleep at night, you know? And I haven't figured out mathematically how he'd visit 2,000 assemblies regularly and systematically during a 40-year plan, but...
Why not sleeping at night?
But as these areas are divided up, and as the auxiliary board members are at present doing in India, they're appointing each one of them tens and even hundreds of assistants, so that every 2 or 3 communities will have an assistant chosen from those areas, even the inactive areas. And then these individuals are brought out under a program of training sponsored by the counselors and the auxiliary board members, and trained in the teachings of the cause and in the workings of the administrative order, to go back and form a nucleus there in those communities, to begin to spark interest in making that local spiritual assembly functioning, bringing it into life. There's been a willingness to form it, but nobody has been able to explain very much what it's all about. There's a great enthusiasm for the cause of God in India, something that I've never seen anyplace else in the Baha'i world where I've been. It's really extraordinary. The spiritual receptivity of the masses of the Indian people is really, really something quite unique. And I think that when the administration gets their whole plan together, they're working on a very, very vigorous 6-month plan now, making a whole series of smaller local plans by identifying the outstanding local spiritual assemblies in the country and then having each one of them adopt extension teaching goals with the help of the board member and the assistants going out and consolidating 5 nearby local spiritual assemblies. And in this way, when those new assemblies become partially active, then they will take on extension teaching goals to nearby groups and help to bring them to assembly status. And so in a systematic pattern, this is going to go forward. But we see how the development of the institution of the counselors and the board members in India is a kind of a foretaste of what is going to happen in the rest of the Baha'i world as the Baha'i communities grow in numbers. Because there now it's becoming necessary to set up a whole office staff for the counselors to be able to coordinate the reports and information and news flowing into them from the auxiliary board members, and also to be able to map their plans for this nationwide series of deepening conferences and training courses for their new assistants, creating circular letters to keep them alive, to stimulate them in the service of the cause. How auxiliary board members, in order to deal with their own areas and figuring out how to translate the inspiration flowing from the Universal House of Justice and the Teaching Center down through the counselors, and the board members are coming through the National Spiritual Assemblies, how to see that this gets out to the believers in Telugu and Marathi and Urdu and all the 15 national languages of India, which complicates the whole situation of the cause immensely there. So they have to set up their own offices and have secretarial staffs, the auxiliary board members, to be able to carry out their services and to coordinate the reports coming in from dozens and dozens of assistants in the area, so that they can pass on this vital information, because they're right there in touch with the grassroots through the counselors to the National Spiritual Assembly, to be shared with the national committees, so they can get a vision, a thorough vision of what's happening at the grassroots of the cause, and together in consultation with the counselors decide on the type of goals and plans which can most effectively win the objectives of the 5-year plan. Now this gives you some vision into the future of how these institutions are going to develop. When you're a local community of 15 members and the assistant visits you, the assistant of one of the board members visits you, or happens to be one of you, you don't get the same perspective yet, the same historical perspective that you will when there's 40,000 believers in that community and there's an assistant resident in that community. You'll see how important this area will be in the future, and how it is helping to bring the bounties and blessings that the Guardian said flow through this arm of the administrative order, through these institutions, right down to each individual believer. The House of Justice has stated clearly in its communications that the auxiliary board members in the areas assigned to them, far from feeling themselves outsiders in the execution of the plan, should feel themselves responsible for the fulfillment of all the goals. And they said, indeed, they're responsible before God for the achievement of the objectives in their areas. This is a tremendous, I would say, crushing responsibility at this point in the development of the 5-year plan, and they need the support of all of us. The assistants need the support of all of us so they can discover what their role is in the cause. You know? All the institutions are in a learning stage, really, in the faith. And the believers, the better we understand the directives of the Universal House of Justice, the better understanding we will have of how these institutions can collaborate. And we are told by the House of Justice that the greater the collaboration between these elected and appointed individuals, the elected councils and appointed individuals at all levels of the cause, the greater will be the confirmations and blessings that will flow both to those institutions and to the communities themselves. In this is the secret of the achievement of the goals of the 5-year plan, because we need all the confirmations and all the blessings we can get. So the point of all of this is that when we think administrative order, let's think two strong arms, that are embracing us through the guidance flowing from this great supreme head of our cause, the Universal House of Justice. This love, this power, this direction, this defining force which reaches out and touches each cell of the body with either the nervous system or the blood system, whatever it is that keeps those individual cells alive. Turn to these institutions. As you turn and love and pray for your local spiritual assembly, turn and love and pray for the assistants and the auxiliary board members and the counselors in your continent. They all need your support. They all need your help to develop the vital role defined for them in the cause of God. And so now we are beginning to get a complete picture of the kind of administrative order that's going to carry us to the threshold of the lesser peace and on into the development of the world order of Baha'u'llah. It's a very, very exciting process. And again, remember, the House says this is the nucleus and pattern of the future world order. Friends, the view of the Baha'i world from the Baha'i World Center is unique. No matter how much one travels around the Baha'i world, I'm sure Mr. Sears will confirm this for me, you don't get the same vision as you do when you sit in the Holy Land and review the communications and receive this flow of information that comes from all over the Baha'i world. It's there that you gather little by little a composite view of what is the Baha'i world community and where the faith stands in the world today. And if there's any bounty that flows to you when you're serving in the World Center, I think this is one of the unique bounties. Of course, above all is the near proximity to the Qibla of the Baha'i faith, to that center of adoration of our cause, the shrine of Baha'u'llah, to which we all turn in our obligatory prayers every day, matching the way we turn with our hearts and souls to that spot, to that dawning point of inspiration on the spiritual levels, on the spiritual level of our daily lives. And the power that pours forth to the Baha'i world there pours forth abundantly to the institutions serving at the World Center. This is a great bounty. Whenever we have any woes, whenever we have any victories, whatever we have, we take it to the threshold of the shrine and can pray there and remember the friends and ask for guidance and ask for inspiration. And then we go and write a letter to the House of Justice and they give us the guidance, supply us the inspiration. There's a wonderful letter from the Guardian where he talks about the future in the development of Mount Carmel, and he speaks about the Mashruq al-Askar on the head of the mountain. He said that the members of the Universal House of Justice will go there to pray and ask for the bounties of God early each morning. And then they will proceed to the heart of the mountain, to the shrine of the Bab, where they will receive those bounties. And then from there they will proceed to the Ark, where they will use those bounties in the service of mankind. That was a very interesting quotation for me, because I often wondered, what are we going to do with the temple on Mount Carmel when the shrine is there? It seemed to me like, how would you ever get up to the temple with the shrine of the Bab right there in the heart of the mountain? But when you think of that, that's really the place of prayer. And the shrines are visitation spots, but we use them, of course, for prayers too. But they are such, the power of them is such that I think sometimes we're unable to utter prayers in those holy places. I know many of the friends have said this. You come into the shrine of the Bab and you're overwhelmed, as if you were on some vast empty plateau and there was the power of God and little you. And there didn't seem to be anything to pray for but just to stand in that presence. Now this House of Justice, and working in close proximity with it, at least physical proximity, this is another unique experience for those serving at the World Center of the Cause. And I want to tell you that the members of the House of Justice, they're really extraordinary people. Maybe working in the House of Justice, for 10 years or however long they've been serving there, has helped to make them this way. I'm sure it has in a way, but they're extraordinary as individuals. And when they speak to the pilgrims about the House of Justice, as individual members sometimes visiting the pilgrim house, oftentimes you'll hear them say, you know, not one of the members of the House of Justice feels themselves to be a ninth part of the House of Justice. We all view the House of Justice as an entity apart from its membership. It is a divine reality. The body in which that spirit is incarnated and through which it functions are the 9 members. But the spirit of the Universal House of Justice is separate and unique and distinct from the individual members. And they point this out in such a beautiful way. And as you serve in the World Center, you realize that this is not just a humble explanation on their part, that there is another entity. And it doesn't matter who the members of the House of Justice are, according to the teachings of our faith. That spirit will still be the same spirit. And it reminds me of the explanation that the Master makes when he talks about the degrees of the spirit in the different kingdoms. The mineral kingdom, where the spirit expresses itself through the power of cohesion, and the vegetable kingdom, where it expresses itself through the power of growth and the power of reproduction. And then in the plant, up into the animal kingdom, where Abdu'l-Baha says, when the proper elements come into conjunction with each other, they attract the animal spirit to them, and then that becomes the animal stage of life. How the Baha'i world, all of us, all over the Baha'i world, participate in bringing into being those elements which attract the spirit of the Universal House of Justice of God. All of you voting for delegates who in turn meet in national conventions and elect National Spiritual Assemblies, 119 of them around the Baha'i world now, and how the 9 members of each of those National Spiritual Assemblies build up the pyramid another step until they bring into identification those 9 elements, the essential elements, 9 men who attract that spirit of God's Universal House of Justice. It's happened. Whenever it happens, as it keeps happening in the future, it will always be the same House of Justice. The House of Justice itself, the members themselves, are oftentimes surprised in retrospect about things that the House of Justice has decided. They find when they come to make a major decision like the development of the assistance to the auxiliary board members, that they have stated that the counselors and board members' influence, they've stated this now 3 years ago, the influence of the counselors and their board members must now reach out to the entire Baha'i world, to the entire Baha'i community. They said this is one of the things that must happen in the future. 3 years, 2 years later, they take this step. They establish the International Teaching Center, and they provide for this extension in the form of assistance. And then they announce to the Baha'i world that the influence of the hands of the cause of God through the Teaching Center, through the counselors and the board members and their insistence, now permeates the entire fabric of Baha'i society. Well, that's the vision we're trying to come up to during this period, particularly during this 5-year plan. And we realize what tremendous responsibilities are weighing on these institutions, together with the elected bodies, to function in a collaborative manner to produce the victories that we all desire. I understand there's going to be a second session this evening. Is that correct? I don't know. It's a second session planned. And I wonder if... how are we doing on time? Sorry. How long have we been going on now? An hour and a half have we been going on now? That went quickly, I'm sorry. Do you want to come?
Friends, we don't want to tire out Mr. Dunbar because he does have another meeting, but he has kindly consented to take some questions just for a few moments. So I'll field the questions. You can put your hands up, and I'm afraid I'll have to arbitrarily stop so that he can get some rest. If you have any questions, that is. Yes? Can you stand up, please, because we really can't hear you up here.
I just wanted to know what the asking was about the elements coming together and then factoring the elements.
Mr. Dunbar, there's a question on the reference of where the passage is.
The elements come together and attract the spirit from the atoms.
The elements come together.
Well, I don't know. Somebody help me. I think Paris talks is one place, and I think also the talks and some answered questions, promulgation of universal peace. You want the page numbers? We'll have to dig those up later.
Yes?
I'd like to know, we're about a year and a half into the 5-year plan. I don't know exactly, but how we are coming to the growth plan. In other words, are the goals being fulfilled all over the country?
What? There's a steady flow of victories, mostly in the form of property achievements. In that sense, there is a groundswell now, distinct from the overall statistical crisis that we're in the number of local spiritual assemblies in the Baha'i world. There is a groundswell of actively functioning local spiritual assemblies. In other words, on the worldwide scale, we find that more Baha'is seem to be active than were ever active before. More individual Baha'is are doing things. And more local spiritual assemblies are coming into life. So that each report, when we hear that a community has, so many local spiritual assemblies, the percentage of active spiritual assemblies is starting to move upwards. Now, this is naturally a slow development, but it's solid, essential development, and it has all to do with the qualitative aspects of this 5-year plan. And it will provide that kind of solid foundation upon which future plans can be built. And it's in that development of more and stronger local spiritual assemblies that we will be able to meet the challenge of the statistical goals by having much more in the way of locally sponsored teaching activities throughout the world during this latter period of the plan.
Were there any other questions? One hand back there, Larry. Oh, sorry, I thought it was Larry's hand.
I'd like to know, as the condition of the world deteriorates, will the properties that the Baha'i Community supply will be able to retain them?
That's a very good question. I wish that I could see into the future and really be able to tell you the answer to it. I think that in many cases, where the properties are titled, of course, and where they are in the name of local spiritual assemblies and national spiritual assemblies, that no matter what the chaotic conditions that come up, there will be some legal claim to those kind of properties in the future. One could only hope so. But it's very difficult to know what's exactly in store, during this period. It hasn't lessened our enthusiasm for acquiring properties. In fact, there's more property goals and more local endowment goals in this plan than in the whole combination of all the plans before this plan. This is the first plan that we have actually specific goals on a worldwide scale for local endowments. Many countries are assigned large numbers of local endowments, particularly countries where we have a lot of rural communities where the Friends have been anxious to contribute small parcels of land for local endowments, for the building of local centers.
There's a hand there.
Could you say something about pioneering world?
Yes. Well, I think that you being the largest community in America, that's one of your vital functions, is to send out pioneers. I'm sure the Los Angeles Baha'i Community has done such tremendous service in the past in this field, and undoubtedly, as a community, this subject weighs heavily on your consciences and on what you can do to help fulfill the pioneer goals. There's still a great quantity of I see Dick Betts is here at the back of the room. Maybe he can tell us the exact numbers. I think it's something like 189 have gone out, and how many remain to go out before October? 221.
121 are trying. Dr. Patrick was here not too long ago. We must have better than just our minimum.
We want to surpass the goal, yes. Well, I think that as the impetus grows, that certainly that'll come about. But what I can mention to you is that it's so vital to the latter part of winning the goals and holding the victories of the past plans and winning the new goals, that the pioneers get out as soon as they can and get oriented in their posts and learn the languages that they're going to have to learn and become a part of the community so they can really be useful before this plan is over. Because this whole pioneer call is because there is really a vital need, and it's directly linked to the success of the 5-year plan. It isn't something extra, it's right in the heart of it. And the International Teaching Plan, which has been launched by the International Teaching Center through the counselors with all the National Spiritual Assemblies of the world last March, is also a vital aspect of this, and it is the plan which identifies this continuous flow of traveling teachers to all parts of the Baha'i world, which is one of the aspects of your own national plan, and I'm sure those goals are being made known to the friends, and that you can help to fulfill those goals. If you can't go on a regular pioneer basis for a long term or for the remainder of a plan or forever, perhaps you can volunteer for travel teaching programs.
One more hand over there. Next to Mrs. Macias.
Oh, thank you. You were speaking on your recent visit to India. As we know, through the news media, the portrait of Gandhi, they have portrayed this country of her numbers as a total tyrant. Now, evidently, by your report, the faith is working relatively comfortable and forging ahead. You don't have too much sort of disbelief in the authorities and so forth. Here we got an open field to teach. But as I attended the last conference, I walked away a little bit shaky because I was thinking, now I don't see the threat of anything except mounted, because when the convention ended, the conference, there were some people that just shouting at us. And I said, well, there's one form of an attack. Now, equate or relate the two situations. In India, as it is for the Baha'is, and as you see it from the World Center, or to forge ahead with the teaching programs in this country.
Well, first let me say that the relationship of the faith to the government of India is quite good and quite cordial. Just to give you an indication,